My mother-in-law banned me from her family's party, said I didn't have the social class to attend. What she didn't know was that 3 months later, I'd return wearing a royal title and a crown-worthy entrance. If you love poetic justice, backstabbing gone wrong, and endings no one sees coming, hit that subscribe button now, because this story will leave you breathless. It's nothing personal, she said, adjusting the diamond brooch at her collar, but I really think it's best you sit this one out, for the family's image. Those were the words that ended 15 years of pretending. My mother-in-law, Victoria Langford, real estate heiress, social gatekeeper, and queen of veiled cruelty, had summoned me to her study 2 weeks before her annual winter gala, a party known for attracting CEOs, old money politicians, and Forbes-featured socialites. I had attended every year since I married Ethan, but this time, the invitation never came, only a conversation. I stood there, across from her massive cherry wood desk, still wearing my blazer from a long day at the architecture firm. My hands smelled like graphite and coffee, and I hadn't had a moment to change. Maybe that was her point. I just think, she continued, her voice as smooth as aged bourbon, it's important to preserve the tone of the event. After all, we'll be welcoming the Aldridge family, European legacy, blue blood, and, well, you've always been more earthy. She said it with a smile, that kind of brittle, frostbitten smile that pretended to be kindness, but cut like glass. I didn't answer, because the only options were to cry or to scream, and she'd have savored both. Instead, I nodded, once, slowly. Of course, I replied, matching her tone. Wouldn't want to embarrass the family. She blinked, surprised. She'd wanted a scene, a confirmation that her words had landed, but all she got was silence. I left the study without another word, drove home in the rain, and walked into the house I no longer recognized as mine. And the silence between Ethan and me had grown over the years. Once, we shared everything. Late-night design critiques, pasta recipes, stolen kisses in the pantry, while his mother banged on the kitchen wall, shouting about decorum. Now we spoke in calendar updates and passive-aggressive text messages. When I told him I wouldn't be attending the gala, he barely looked up from his laptop. Probably for the best, he muttered. You hate those things anyway. I studied his profile. Angular, expensive, a face designed for the front row of a charity auction. She didn't invite me, I said flatly. He paused, then back to typing. I'm sure she just wants to keep it tight this year. Limited list, big names. I didn't ask why I no longer counted as big enough. I already knew the answer. I had no pedigree, no trust fund. My father was a carpenter. My mother taught at a public school. My name didn't open doors. It earned patronizing smiles and awkward silences. I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks Ethan never noticed. I thought about the first time I met Victoria, the way her eyes scanned me like I was a bank statement, the compliments that weren't compliments. Oh, you're self-taught. How charming. Or, it's sweet that you still work. Ethan makes enough for both of you, doesn't he? But this, banning me from her event, that was new, bold, and final. The next morning, I emailed my assistant and asked for a 6-week sabbatical. Subject, extended leave body. Personal reasons, effective immediately. No further explanation. No apology. I packed a single suitcase, booked the first international flight I could afford on short notice, and left Ethan a note on the kitchen counter. Gone to breathe. Don't follow me. I needed to disappear. I needed to remember who I was, before Victoria rewrote me into some supporting character in her dynasty. And I didn't know then that I'd return with a royal title. But that's the thing about exile. It makes room for reinvention. And sometimes, reinvention wears a crown. The flight to Vienna was almost empty. A red eye that promised anonymity, a new country, and 10 hours without expectations. I didn't tell Ethan where I was going. I didn't even know myself until I clicked purchase. Europe had always called to me. Not the glittering cities or Instagram backdrops, but the architecture, the old bones of civilization, places that had survived wars, empires, revolutions. I needed to stand somewhere older than Victoria Langford's judgment. The moment I landed, I turned off my phone. Not silenced. Off. If Ethan needed to reach me, he'd have to try harder than a text. If Victoria noticed I was gone, she'd assume I was sulking. And I let her. Let them both believe I'd retreated. Because I had. But not for the reasons they thought. I rented a quiet flat above a bakery in Salzburg, far from the city center. The owner, a warm-eyed widow named Franziska, barely spoke English, but taught me to knead bread like a ritual. Every morning I helped her with the ovens, before heading off with my sketchbook and camera, exploring winding cobblestone streets, cathedral ruins, hidden gardens wrapped in vines. I wasn't trying to be found. I was trying to find myself. Days passed like pages turning slowly. I slept without dreaming. I walked without rushing. I drew again, not for clients, not for approvals, but for the joy of line and form. I remembered who I had been before I became someone's wife, someone's daughter-in-law, someone's not good enough. One afternoon, I visited Schloss Wiltenstein, an old castle estate recently opened to the public. The tour was quiet, just 6 of us, led by a woman in a forest green cape, who spoke like she'd been telling the same story for centuries. But when we reached the marble gallery, I felt something shift. He was standing near a window, half turned toward the light. A man in a navy coat, sharp profile, dark hair. At first glance, he looked like any other tourist, but there was something in the way the docents treated him. The quick, deferential glances, the hush that fell when he entered a room. He caught me watching, didn't smile, just tilted his head slightly, as if deciding whether I was worth acknowledging. He must have decided yes. After the tour, I sat outside near the courtyard fountain, flipping through my sketchbook. The air smelled like pine and stone. I barely noticed him approach. "You're the only one who didn't take a photo," he said, his accent crisply British with something older underneath. "You drew instead." I looked up. He was taller than I expected, eyes like pewter, no attempt at charm, just observation. "I don't trust photos," I said. "They steal the moment. Sketching lets you stay inside it." A pause. "Then, that's rare." He sat beside me without asking, not arrogantly, just naturally, as if he belonged there, as if the bench had been waiting. His name was Edward. No last name at first, just Edward. We talked for over an hour, about history, about architecture, about the loneliness of being underestimated. He didn't ask about my husband. I didn't ask why the staff at the castle had whispered when he passed. We weren't there to interrogate, just exist. We met again the next day, then again, and again. I learned that Edward wasn't a tourist. He was associated with the Wiltenstein estate. That's all he said at first. It wasn't until a week later, sitting in the back row of a small cathedral concert, that he finally told me. "My full name is Edward Leopold Andreas Wilhelm, Duke of Ausfeld." My breath left me, not because I'd fallen for some fantasy, but because I hadn't, because he hadn't led with it, hadn't used it, hadn't needed it. I didn't respond immediately. I watched the cello bow rise and fall beneath the candlelight. Then I whispered, "Well, that explains the velvet gloves on the tour guide." He laughed, not formally, not politely, but genuinely. It would be easy to say I fell in love in Europe, but the truth is, Europe gave me space to remember I was lovable. Edward didn't sweep me off my feet. He saw me where I stood. He listened to my silences. When I told him about Victoria, about the ban, the years of quiet humiliation, the final insult, he didn't offer revenge. He offered perspective. "You were never small," he said. "They were just afraid of your size." I married him 6 weeks later. No big fanfare, no crowns or gowns or public vows, just a ceremony in the Wiltenstein chapel, snow falling outside the stained glass windows, and a quiet, perfect yes. 3 weeks later, Tatler published the news. American architect marries European aristocrat in surprise winter ceremony. Meet the new Duchess of Ausfeld. I didn't send a copy to Victoria. I didn't need to, because the Langfords were already preparing for their next gala, the biggest yet. A partnership announcement with the Aldridge family, a guest list of diplomats, legacy fund heirs, and titled Europeans. And this time, I was at the very top of that list. And the envelope arrived in a couriered leather pouch, embossed with the Langford crest in gold foil. It sat on the silver tray by the concierge desk of the hotel in Vienna, where Edward and I had paused for 3 days on our way to England. We had just returned from a lunch meeting with his family's solicitor when the concierge intercepted us in the lobby with a crisp bow. A private delivery for the Duchess of Ausfeld. I hadn't yet grown used to the title. It still felt like a costume I was learning to wear, its sleeves a little long, its weight unfamiliar. But when Edward glanced at the envelope and raised a single eyebrow, I understood instantly where it came from. Victoria, The woman who had told me I wasn't fit to share a dinner table with her guests had now addressed an invitation, by hand no less, to Her Grace the Duchess of Ausfeld. I opened it carefully. Inside, the same florid calligraphy used on every Langford gala invite I had received for the last 15 years. The color scheme, silver and ivory, hadn't changed, nor had the event location, Langford Estate, Beacon Hill, Connecticut. But there was something different in the phrasing. In light of your recent nuptials and elevated station, the Langford family cordially invites you to join us in celebration of the Winter Gala, honoring new transatlantic partnerships and enduring family legacy. There was no apology, no mention of my prior banishment, no acknowledgement that they had uninvited me to this very event not months earlier, just a veiled retraction cloaked in social formality. Classic Victoria. And I showed the invitation to Edward later that evening, our suite filled with the soft golden light of the setting sun and the clink of glass as he poured 2 drinks. He read it once, then twice. "You don't have to go," he said. "I know. But you want to." It wasn't a question. He knew. Because it wasn't about revenge. It was about presence. It was about returning not with bitterness, but with truth, with quiet, undeniable power. Not to rub it in, but to reclaim something that had been taken from me over years of microaggressions and gaslighting, and "You're just being sensitive." "If I do go," I said, "I go on my terms." Edward nodded. "Then let's go buy you a dress that silences entire rooms." Victoria didn't know that by inviting the Duchess of Ausfeld, she was inviting a title protected by international diplomatic protocols, press attention, and protocol officers. She also didn't know that Edward's mother, Lady Margaret Wilhelm, was close friends with 2 members of the Aldridge family, or that they had already RSVP'd with personal notes of delight upon learning I would attend. I didn't tell her. I let her prepare her battlefield, unaware that I was no longer a soldier. I was the storm. The day of the gala, snow fell across Connecticut like a cleansing veil. The Langford estate hadn't changed. Same double staircase curving like arms around the marble foyer. Same chandeliers Victoria imported from a disassembled opera house in Prague. Same smell of orchids and cold stone. But I had changed. I arrived in a deep emerald gown, floor length, tailored with architectural precision. My hair was swept into a minimalist chignon, revealing the delicate diamond pendant Edward's grandmother had passed down on our wedding day. Edward walked beside me, tuxedo crisp, coat lined with family insignia, his presence effortless and regal. Behind us, 2 of his diplomatic aides entered discreetly. Guests, yes, but also quiet witnesses. The murmurs began the moment we crossed the threshold. "Is that the American girl?" "No, that's the Duchess." "Victoria's daughter-in-law?" "I thought they were separated." "Wait, is that her?" I didn't speak. I didn't smile. I walked slowly, deliberately, past stunned faces and hollow greetings. I felt every pair of eyes shift, recalibrate, reassess. Victoria stood at the top of the stairs, wineglass poised like a prop in an act she had rehearsed too many times. She wore royal blue, always blue, because it made her feel like a queen. But that night, it faded beside emerald. When our eyes met, her smile flickered. "Darling," she said, descending 1 step. "You look..." She stopped, not because she didn't have the words, but because for once, none of them would land. "Your Grace," I corrected softly, stepping closer. "But you may still call me Mary." The gasp behind me was audible. A single sentence had shifted the balance of the room. Victoria recovered quickly, as she always did, but the tremble in her hand gave her away. "Of course. We're honored you could join us. We didn't expect..." "I'm sure you didn't," I said, voice velvet-wrapped steel. "But I make it a point never to decline a second invitation, especially when I wasn't offered the first." I smiled, not cruelly, just enough. As Edward and I entered the ballroom, I felt the shift in temperature, not physical, but social. Conversations paused as we passed. Chairs turned. Faces softened, then stiffened. I was no longer the woman who married up. I was the woman who had risen beyond them. Victoria didn't know it yet, but tonight wouldn't end the way she'd planned. The Langford ballroom had always been Victoria's domain. She designed every inch of it to impress and intimidate. Soaring ceilings, gold leaf trim, a chandelier rumored to be insured for more than most homes, and a floor polished so brightly it reflected your insecurities back at you. But tonight, something was different. The air didn't belong to her. It belonged to the silence that followed me. Everywhere I walked, conversations shifted. People turned mid-sentence. Their voices dropped. The clink of champagne glasses became a background rhythm to the tension I carried like perfume. I wasn't flaunting. I didn't need to. The room had already decided to recalibrate itself around me. Edward stood tall at my side, his posture relaxed but unmistakably noble. People who once addressed me as Mrs. Langford now stumbled over my new title. Your Grace. Oh, pardon me. Duchess, would you... I offered the same response to each. A smile just cool enough to be remembered, just warm enough to be forgiven. Victoria trailed us like a polite shadow, introducing us to guests who knew full well who we were. Her voice was tight, her smiles brittle. I knew the signs. Her world was tilting beneath her heels, and she hadn't yet found her footing. Then came the Aldridges, 3 generations of European legacy in one family, baronial wealth, art collections, and the kind of influence Victoria had spent decades trying to court. Lady Anthea Aldridge approached first, dressed in icy lavender silk and pearls large enough to be weapons. She extended both hands to me before Victoria could utter a word. Darling girl, the Duchess of Ausfeld in our little corner of the world. What a triumph. I read about your wedding in Tatler. So tasteful, so rare. Thank you, I said, returning her embrace. And the emerald. Stunning. Is that a Wilhelm heirloom? It is. From Edward's grandmother. She beamed. Then you wear it with honor. Victoria cleared her throat. Anthea, you remember my son's wife, Mary. Lady Anthea turned slowly, the corner of her mouth lifting in a look I knew all too well. It was the same smile Victoria used when preparing to destroy someone. Except this time, she wasn't the wielder. Oh, Victoria, Lady Anthea said sweetly. How fortunate you are to be connected to the Wilhelm line now. Quite the upgrade from what we've all come to expect. Victoria blinked. That flicker of rage, quickly masked, was almost imperceptible. Yes, she managed. Quite. The dinner was served in the East Gallery. An 8-course ordeal of foie gras, truffle ravioli, and champagne flutes refilled every time they dropped below the halfway mark. I was seated beside Edward, across from a tech billionaire and his wife, and just 2 seats down from Victoria. The seating chart, clearly revised last minute, tried to balance status and proximity, but it only amplified the new reality. I wasn't a tolerated in-law. I was the most powerful woman at the table. Halfway through the 3rd course, Victoria leaned in. I assume you'll be traveling quite a lot now, with your duties. We will, I said, but we've kept a residence in New York for now. And of course, the house in Austria. It's a bit small by Langford standards, but the vineyards help. Of course, she said tightly. Though I do wonder how someone like you adjusts to that level of scrutiny. The press, the titles. I sipped my wine. I've had years of training, Victoria. You were a far more brutal tutor than the British tabloids. The billionaire's wife choked softly on her truffle cream. Edward didn't even glance up from his plate. Then, after dessert, the music began. Classical, of course. A string quartet played near the hearth while couples drifted onto the dance floor. I declined Edward's first invitation to dance, not because I didn't want to, but because I had seen Victoria rise and begin her slow parade from table to table, delivering parting words and claiming credit for everyone's presence. She approached me again, this time with a different tactic. You've certainly come a long way, she said, swirling her wine. I'm sure there are people who'd be surprised. Surprise tends to follow when you underestimate someone for too long. Is that what you think I did? It's what you wanted to do. But you overplayed your hand, Victoria. You made the mistake of thinking exile would break me, but it built me. You're different now, she said, voice barely audible. No, I said, standing. I'm the same. You just can't edit the narrative anymore. Hi, Shan. Edward offered his arm, and this time, I took it. We walked to the dance floor together, and as he led me into the first turn of the waltz, the string quartet shifted seamlessly into rhythm. Around us, other couples joined in, but none of them mattered. For the first time in 15 years, I felt entirely in control of my story, not as someone's wife, not as someone's disappointment, but as myself, whole, rebuilt, and recognized. Hasta. Victoria watched from the edge of the room. She didn't smile. She didn't toast. She simply stood there, frozen, dressed in royal blue, surrounded by the party she thought she controlled. And I danced. The party was Victoria's masterpiece, but she was losing control of the brush. Even as the string quartet played with mechanical grace, and servers weaved expertly through the crowd with golden trays of caviar canapes and saffron martinis. Something in the room had shifted. I could feel it. The whispers no longer orbited around her. They followed me now. Soft, speculative, reverent. She's different. She married into royalty, did you hear? No, actual royalty. A duchess now. I always thought Victoria underestimated her. God, can you imagine turning that away from your family? Victoria heard them too. I knew it in the way her shoulders tightened each time I passed. The way she clutched her wine glass like it was a lifeline, not an accessory. She had built her social world like a fortress, guest lists as battlements, heritage as stone. But now the foundation was cracking. Not because I attacked it, but because she did. She invited me back not as a daughter-in-law, but as a pawn. She expected gratitude. She got royalty. And worse, public favor. Now after the waltz, Edward stepped away to speak with Lady Anthea and a German count whose name I could barely pronounce. I took a moment to escape the ballroom noise, drifting into one of the adjoining salons. Smaller, quieter, decorated in cream and forest green. It was a room Victoria rarely used. Too unimpressive, she once said. But tonight, it felt like a sanctuary. That's where she found me. Always a predator in velvet gloves. Avoiding the spotlight already? She asked from the doorway. Just catching my breath, I replied, turning toward the fireplace. You do look lovely tonight, she said carefully. The dress, the pendant. You've finally learned how to carry yourself. Or maybe, I said, you've finally learned how to see me. She walked in slowly, her heels whispering over the Persian rug. This world moves fast, Mary. You've made quite the leap, but it's fragile, you know. One misstep, and I'll fall. You always did have a talent for dramatics. I turned to face her fully. Let's not pretend this is about dresses or protocols, Victoria. You didn't want me here because you were afraid I'd outgrow you. And now I have. Her mask slipped for just a second. A flicker of something like grief passed behind her eyes. Or maybe it was panic. Regret, even. But it vanished as quickly as it came. You were never meant to be part of this world, she said. And yet, here I am. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You think you've won, but this isn't about titles. It's about blood, legacy, and trust me, Mary, yours still doesn't match ours. I didn't flinch. I'd heard versions of this speech since my wedding day. But this time, I saw what she was hiding beneath it. Fear. Not of me, of what I might uncover. Funny you mention blood, I said slowly, because I've been reading up on the Langford legacy lately. Some of it's quite colorful. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't take the bait. Careful, dear. You're starting to sound paranoid. I learned from the best. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a soft voice interrupted. There you are. We both turned. It was Eleanor Aldridge, youngest of the Aldridge daughters, barely 26, but already commanding attention wherever she went. She smiled at me warmly, then addressed Victoria with a practiced, icy elegance. Mrs. Langford, I think Lady Anthea's looking for you. Something about the foundation speech timing. Victoria hesitated, caught between confrontation and duty. She nodded once, curtly, then turned and left the room with her shoulders rigid and head high, like a queen retreating without admitting defeat. Eleanor waited until she was gone before sitting gracefully beside me on the settee. She didn't expect you to come, she said. She certainly didn't expect me to be welcomed. Eleanor grinned. It's been glorious watching her scramble all evening. But more than that, you look powerful, Mary. Not just beautiful, rooted. That terrifies her. I smiled softly, surprised by the unexpected ally. She used to say I was too ordinary. She's wrong. You're formidable. Later that evening, just before the speeches, I wandered into the Langford library. It had always been my favorite room in the estate. Warm, quiet, lined with worn books that smelled of dust and cedar. Victoria rarely used it. Too nostalgic. Too small. I wasn't looking for anything. Just space. But what I found was a folder, left slightly ajar on her desk, half tucked beneath the party's seating chart. Curious, I opened it. Inside, financial records. Wire transfers. A deed. The name on the document stopped my breath. Langford Foundation Emergency Trust. Beneficiary, Harrison J. Langford. Age, 4. I froze. Victoria's late husband, Ethan's father, had passed almost a decade ago. But Harrison? That name didn't exist in the family. Not officially, not publicly. My fingers flipped through the rest of the file. Pediatric invoices, private security details, a non-disclosure agreement. Victoria had a secret child, or a grandchild, and had been hiding it for years. I didn't take the folder. I didn't say a word. But as I returned to the ballroom, heart pounding under my silk dress, I understood something critical. Victoria hadn't just feared my presence tonight. She feared my eyes, because I didn't just threaten her pride. I threatened her secrets, and secrets in the Langford house were everything. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the noise. Langford parties always ended with echoes of string quartets and crystal clinks vibrating through the estate like a heartbeat long after guests had gone. No, I didn't sleep because the folder I'd seen in the library refused to leave my mind. Harrison J. Langford, age 4. He wasn't listed on any Langford genealogy registry. No family photo albums. No whispers in the corners of the ballroom. But the trust documentation was real. The ink on the pediatric invoices still fresh. The signatures, Victoria's unmistakable cursive, undeniable. And the money? Massive. A 7-figure emergency fund. Monthly transfers to an anonymous guardian. Clauses that restricted disclosure to public-facing members of the Langford estate. This wasn't casual charity. This was containment. And by dawn, I was already in the West sitting room, a space I used to retreat to during those early days of my marriage, when Victoria's passive aggression felt like a slow-drip IV. It had high windows, an old record player, and shelves filled with books no one had touched in years. It was where I could think, and right now, I needed to think like a strategist, not a guest. I reached for my phone. Edward answered on the first ring, his voice still touched with sleep. "Something wrong?" "No," I said. "Something's missing, and I'm going to find it." "Where are you?" "Still at the estate. You left after the gala, remember?" "I stayed overnight. Thought it would be instructive." "Be careful," he said after a pause. "Victoria doesn't lose quietly." "She already did," I whispered. "Now I'm just walking through the wreckage." I didn't go back to the library. That would have been too obvious. Victoria would have secured whatever I saw the moment she noticed it gone. Instead, I went to the attic, the one place she avoided, not because she was afraid of dust, but because it held remnants of a Langford past she couldn't edit. Ethan's childhood drawings, love letters from her late husband, documents predating the empire she'd tried to make the family into. It was her one blind spot, nostalgia. I picked the lock with a hairpin. Child's play, really. Inside, beneath a tarp-covered trunk and a stack of old charity banquet records, I found a black lacquer box. It was labeled with a single word, Julian. I almost missed it. Julian Langford had been Victoria's brother-in-law, estranged, quietly removed from the family line after a scandal I'd only heard whispers about during my first year of marriage. Something about drugs. An illegitimate child. A fallout no one documented. Julian died 7 years ago in a private plane crash. Or at least, that's what the Langfords claimed. But I'd never seen a death certificate. Never been to a funeral. The box was light. Inside, just 4 things. 1. A copy of Julian's original will, unsigned, unnotarized. 2. A photo of him holding a newborn baby, dated 5 years ago. 3. A blood work report with Langford DNA markers. 4. A sealed envelope addressed to E. Langford, in handwriting that looked rushed, frantic. I hesitated, but only for a moment. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, written in blue ink, slanted and uneven. "Ethan, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you need to understand what she's done. The boy is yours." Victoria lied. She said it would be better if we kept it quiet, that the scandal would ruin us both. She convinced me to disappear, to leave him under her control. But she never intended to protect him. Just the name, just the dynasty. "If you ever find this, find Harrison. He's your son. You deserve to know, and he deserves better." My knees gave out before I realized I'd moved. I sat on the attic floor for a long time, holding a truth so big it could fracture everything. Ethan had a son, not with me, not with another woman, but born of a lie, orchestrated by Victoria, engineered like one of her seating charts, crafted not out of malice, but control, her signature motive. And now Harrison was out there, a child hidden from the world, raised in secrecy under financial guardianship, his identity erased for the sake of Langford optics. I should have felt rage, but what I felt was resolve. When I finally came down from the attic, I wasn't the same woman who had entered. I found Victoria in the greenhouse, pruning roses that only bloomed because staff rotated the soil every week, and replaced half the plants every season. Like everything else she touched, they looked alive, but they weren't thriving. She didn't look up as I approached. "You're still here?" she said. "I thought royalty preferred early checkouts." "I wanted one last walk through the estate," I said, my voice calm. "Nostalgia, you know. You always were sentimental," she murmured. I let the silence grow long enough for her to start to feel it. Then I dropped the match. "How is Harrison doing?" She froze. Her hands stopped mid-prune, clippers hovering above the bloom. "Excuse me? 4 years old, right? Quiet boy. Likes puzzles. I imagine he has Julian's eyes." Her jaw clenched so tightly I could see the vein rise along her neck. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You do, and I don't need your confirmation. I found the file in the library, and the letter in the attic." She turned slowly, her eyes colder than I'd ever seen them. "You have no idea what you're playing with." "You're right," I said, stepping closer. "I'm not playing." I leaned in. "I'm documenting." By the time I arrived back at our apartment in Manhattan, the city was already painted in the soft gold of winter dusk. From the penthouse windows, Central Park glowed like a quiet forest under streetlights. But inside our home, everything felt dimmer, stale, silent in the way only well-decorated cages are. I didn't call Ethan ahead. I wanted him unguarded. He was standing in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, chopping fresh basil like it was the most normal thing in the world, like his mother hadn't buried his firstborn behind a wall of non-disclosure agreements and emergency trusts. "You're home early," he said, glancing up. "Not early," I said, hanging up my coat. "Just finally." He looked at me, puzzled. "Did something happen at the gala?" "Oh, something always happens at the Langford Gala," I said softly. "This year, it was the truth." He stopped chopping. His eyes narrowed slightly, that telltale crease between his brows forming like a storm cloud. "What truth?" I crossed the room slowly, placing the black lacquer box on the kitchen island between us. "Open it." He didn't move. "What is this, Mary?" "Julian's. Or, more accurately, yours." His mouth opened to protest, but something in my tone froze him. His hand moved toward the box hesitantly, as if it might explode. He lifted the lid, pulled out the letter. I watched his face transform in slow, devastating stages. Confusion, disbelief, then horror. His breath caught, his hands trembled, and then he read the name aloud, barely a whisper. "Harrison." Silence swelled around us like fog. "Is it true?" I asked, even though I already knew. He looked up, eyes glassy, voice raw. "I didn't know. Mary, I swear to God, I didn't know. But you suspected." A long, brittle pause. He nodded. "There was a rumor, years ago, right after Julian disappeared. My mother said it was just another of his messes, that he'd gone off grid again, and then that he'd died. She showed me the plane report, the crash photos. I didn't ask questions, because it was easier not to." He flinched. "You knew she was capable of things like this," I said, pacing now. "You felt it, but you kept your head down, because silence kept the Langford name polished, because asking questions would have made you complicit." "No," he said, voice cracking, "because I was afraid of what I'd find." "Exactly." I turned to face him fully. "That boy, your son, has been erased for the sake of a family legacy that only exists on cocktail napkins and gala invitations. And your mother? She didn't just hide him. She weaponized him, structured his existence as a liability to be contained." He sank onto a bar stool, shoulders slumped, hands cradling the letter like it might vanish. "I didn't even know his name," he whispered. "I didn't even know. And yet I found him, in 2 days, just by following the rot your mother tried to seal behind polished doors." He didn't speak for a long time, and I didn't fill the silence. I let it expand, let it press against him like the weight of every lie he let fester for the sake of Langford optics. Finally, he said, "What happens now?" I looked at him, and for the first time in our marriage, I truly saw all of him. The charm, the cowardice, the man who had once made me laugh over burnt lasagna, the boy still trapped under his mother's expectations. "You find him," I said. "You go to the address. You ask for him by name. You bring an apology, and you don't expect forgiveness." "Not right away. Maybe not ever." He nodded slowly. "And you?" he asked. I picked up my phone, opened the voice recorder app, and slid it across the counter. "I want you to say everything you just told me, on record, because the Langford PR machine will spin this faster than a roulette wheel the second they smell blood." His mouth opened again, reflexively, defensively. Then he nodded, pressed record, and told the truth. And I didn't stay the night. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, just the quiet click of my heels as I left the building that once felt like a dream and now felt like evidence. At the corner, I paused and looked back. From this distance, the penthouse looked like a fairy tale, all gold and glass, but I knew now what lay behind the walls, not just deception, inheritance. And like any poison passed down, it left traces in every generation, unless someone chose to break the cycle. I didn't know yet if Ethan would, but I had, and that was enough for now. And the next morning, I met with my lawyer. Not Margaret, not Edward's royal counsel. This was a different kind of lawyer, one I hadn't used since before I was ever a Langford. Alyssa Tran, clean lines, razor mind, former journalist turned litigator, specialized in reputation management, whistleblower protections, and estate law. The kind of woman Victoria Langford would have dismissed at a dinner party and feared in court. "You came ready," Alyssa said, after I handed her a leather portfolio thick with documents. "Always," I replied. She flipped through it like a detective reading an autopsy report. Property records, trust documents, Julian's unsigned will, the blood work, photos, the scanned letter, and at the very bottom, a signed, time-stamped recording from Ethan Langford, acknowledging the existence of his son and the cover-up orchestrated by his mother. When she closed the folder, her face was impassive. "This is nuclear. It needs to be," I said. "You're not just exposing a secret, Mary. You're detonating a legacy." I nodded. Victoria built that legacy like a stage set, flawless from the front, hollow from behind. It deserves to collapse. And what do you want from the ashes? I looked out the window. The city moved like it always did, indifferent and electric. I thought of Harrison, of the boy growing up unaware of who he was, why his last name had been stripped from him, why the people with power and money had chosen silence. "I want him protected," I said, "and I want the truth to exist where her lies have taken root for years, publicly." And Alyssa moved quickly. By the end of the day, she had contacted a private investigator with international access to begin tracking Harrison's current guardianship and confirm his safety. She'd also initiated preemptive protection for the documents in the event the Langfords tried to interfere, court injunctions, time-stamped notarizations, secure backups in 3 countries. I hadn't even realized how much I'd been bracing until the moment I left her office. The relief wasn't loud. It was structural. My bones didn't feel like scaffolding anymore. Back at my new apartment, Midtown, minimalist, mine, I poured a glass of wine and sat down at the desk I'd built for one purpose only: truth. I opened my laptop. Not for revenge, for record, for every woman who had ever been dismissed with a smile, for every truth covered by wealth and heritage and a mother-in-law's thinly veiled superiority. I wrote a single essay. The Winter Duchess. What power really looks like. I didn't use names. Not yet. But I told the story. Of the party I was banned from. Of the silence I was expected to carry. Of the woman who taught me to smile while bleeding. And the moment I decided not to anymore. Power, I wrote, isn't about who speaks loudest. It's about who refuses to be edited. I was never too small. They were just afraid I might outgrow their box. And now I'm here to confirm I did. I sent it to a friend at The Atlantic, who'd been chasing me for months for the real story behind the American Duchess. She'd promised me full editorial control, 0 spin, and the chance to approve every quote. She read it and called me 5 minutes later. "Mary, this is surgical. It's just honest. You're about to burn a dynasty down with a whisper." I said nothing. Some things don't need applause. Interim. The article dropped 48 hours later. No splashy headline. Just a photo. Me at the gala. Emerald dress glowing under the chandelier. And the subhead. Silenced. Banished. Crowned. Now, she speaks. It went viral in under 3 hours. By dinner, my inbox had 278 unread messages. By midnight, Victoria had called 14 times. I didn't answer, but I watched. The public loved the story, because it wasn't just about revenge. It was about erasure. About every woman who'd been told she didn't belong, only to return stronger, smarter, untouchable. The power was in the restraint, the calmness of it. I didn't drag Victoria's name through the mud. I just opened the window and let the wind speak for itself. And the next morning, Ethan showed up at my door. He looked different, paler, smaller. He held a manila folder in his hands. "I found him," he said. I stepped aside, let him in without a word. He placed the folder on the counter, carefully, as if it contained something sacred. Inside, photos. A small boy with sandy brown hair and Julian's smile, playing in a park, building a Lego tower, sitting beside a woman with tired eyes and gentle hands, his guardian, a friend of Julian's, living quietly in rural Vermont. "She kept everything," Ethan said softly. "Every letter Julian wrote, every toy, every report card. She never once took a photo without his permission. She promised him anonymity, but she always planned to tell him the truth. And you? I'm going to meet him," he said. "Not as a Langford, as a man who failed him and wants to begin again." I nodded. "Then you go as Ethan," I said. "Leave the name at the door." He looked at me, and I saw it again. That sadness, that quiet recognition that I had become someone he couldn't follow. "And us?" he asked. I shook my head gently. "There is no us. And there's only what we built, and what I had to rebuild when it collapsed." He didn't argue. He just left. This time, without the need to slam a door. While that night, I lay on my own couch, lights dimmed, fireplace flickering. The article had reached 6 million views. Victoria had issued a public statement denying everything. The comments shredded her in 4 languages. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. Finally. The truth wasn't fire. It was oxygen, and I had finally remembered how to breathe. 2 days after the article, the Langford family board convened behind closed doors. 12 members, 3 bloodline heirs, 9 legacy shareholders with more loyalty to market optics than to Victoria's name. And for the first time in Langford history, I was summoned. The invitation came not from Victoria, of course, but from Leonard Blake, the oldest board member, 74, ruthless, and sharp enough to see what the press couldn't unsee. His message was brief. "You built your credibility outside this family. We'd like to hear what else you know." It wasn't a request. It was an audit. So I went, not to reclaim a seat I'd never truly held, but to witness the fall of the woman who'd once barred me from a party because I lacked the polish of aristocracy. The Langford Holdings boardroom was as severe as I remembered. High-gloss walnut table, leather chairs, a chandelier that looked like it belonged in a Versailles corridor. On the wall, the Langford crest, a lion, a compass, and the family motto, Virtus per hereditatem, virtue through inheritance. I sat facing it, and wondered how many centuries it had taken for them to confuse inheritance with virtue in the first place. Victoria arrived last. She swept in wearing gray silk and pearls so tightly knotted they looked like armor. Her heels clicked across the floor like a judge's gavel. She didn't look at me, but I looked at her, and for once, she didn't look tall. She looked like a woman walking into a reckoning she hadn't planned for, because she'd never considered anyone but herself powerful enough to initiate one. "Let's begin," Leonard said. And just like that, the boardroom became a courtroom. And they started with the trust. Langford Foundation emergency allocations, established under Victoria's discretionary control, supposedly earmarked for humanitarian work. But over the last 4 years, over $3.1 million had been moved into untraceable LLCs that all funneled back to Harrison's Guardian account. No mention in tax filings, no board disclosure, no oversight. "This," Leonard said dryly, "is not a philanthropic pipeline. This is a shadow asset." Victoria's response was clinical. It was a contingency fund, necessary in case Julian's past returned to destabilize the family reputation. "So you hid a child?" one member asked. "I protected an investment," she said. She didn't flinch, not even once, but the room did. And then they brought up me, not as a threat, as a variable. "Your Grace," Leonard said, with a nod that carried the weight of a subtle apology, "your article generated considerable traction. 37% spike in Langford media mentions, yes, but also a 22% drop in consumer trust scores among female investors aged 28 to 49. That demographic represents 41% of our portfolio." I raised an eyebrow. "Is this your way of thanking me for the free focus group?" A few board members chuckled. Even Leonard allowed the corner of his mouth to twitch. But Victoria, she looked like glass under pressure. "She's not a Langford," she said suddenly. "She's been gone for months. She left my son. She married a foreign royal, and then burned us publicly. Her allegiance is not with this family. Neither is yours," I said. Her eyes whipped toward me, venomous. You used the family name to build a fortress of secrets. You stripped a child of his identity. You treated the truth like a contagion to quarantine. You built this house of cards. And now it's falling. Leonard cleared his throat, and silence settled like dust. We've reviewed the legal findings, he said, and pending full audit, we'll be appointing an interim director of the Langford Foundation, someone with proven public trust, international diplomacy experience, and, frankly, better optics. Victoria turned slowly. She already knew. You're giving it to her? Leonard didn't even answer. He turned to me. Will you accept temporary control of the foundation during the restructuring process? I didn't hesitate. Yes. The Victoria stood, but not to argue. To leave. She didn't speak. She didn't scream. She just walked out, her pearls swaying like a metronome behind her. For a woman who lived in control, silence was the loudest concession she could give. I stayed seated until the room cleared. Then I looked up at the Langford crest again. Virtus per hereditatem. I smiled. Maybe it's time to rewrite the motto. Thus that evening, a press release went out. Langford Foundation announces interim director, Duchess of Osfeld to lead restructuring process amid transparency push. The headlines followed. The Duchess takes control. Langford Empire under new eyes. Victoria Langford ousted in silent coup. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like someone's accessory. I felt like the author of the next chapter. By the end of the week, my face was on 5 major magazine covers. 3 praised me. 2 asked if I was a calculated social climber in Duchess's clothing. I read all of them, not out of vanity, but precision. Public narrative was just another architecture project. You study the framework, note the stress points, and decide where to reinforce or demolish. The Langford Foundation had operated for decades like a PR-driven ghost ship. No audits, no transparency, just ribbon cuttings and tax write-offs. Under my interim leadership, we changed everything in 48 hours. Full internal review, third-party forensic audit, a rotating board of trustees with external accountability, including 2 survivors from programs Langford had once used for tax sheltering. The press called it a revolution in pearls. I called it late. Still, not everything could be fixed with policy. The backlash came hard. Old money loyalists accused me of betrayal. Donors withdrew. Society columnists speculated that Edward had orchestrated my rise. One even accused me of using Harrison as a pawn, an accusation so grotesque I didn't even respond. But I knew the storm would pass, because truth doesn't beg for approval. It just waits to be proven. And that Saturday, I visited Harrison. Ethan had arranged it with the guardian, Sarah, a kind, tired woman who'd carried more than her share of burden. She opened the door of the small Vermont home with a softness in her eyes that spoke of heartbreak and relief. He doesn't know who you are, she said. Just that you helped find him. That's enough, I replied. He was building a puzzle on the carpet when I walked in. A castle, 40 pieces finished, the edges methodically placed. A small plastic knight sitting in the center like a sentry. Hi, Harrison, I said softly, kneeling beside him. He didn't look up right away, just moved another piece into place. Do you like castles? They don't fall if you build the corners first, he said matter-of-factly. I smiled. You're right. He picked up another piece, studied it, and said without looking at me, Are you the lady from the picture? My breath caught. Sarah had shown him something. Not a headline, I hoped. Just the basics. Yes, I said, but you can just call me Mary. He nodded once, then handed me a puzzle piece. You do this side. I'll do that one. It was the first true invitation I'd received in months that wasn't laced with strategy. So I sat, and I built, piece by piece, corner by corner, with a child who was never meant to be forgotten. Later that night, back in New York, I opened my inbox. 200 unread emails, press inquiries, event invitations, thinly veiled bribes, and one message that stopped my heart. Subject, she's not done. The sender was anonymous. The body was only one sentence. You exposed Victoria's smallest secret. Do you think she let the real one live? Attached. A single image. Grainy. Scanned from an old photograph. It showed Julian, not holding Harrison, but standing beside a woman. Dark hair. Hands clenched. Eyes shadowed. In her arms. A second baby. And scribbled on the back, in familiar handwriting. Zurich. 2019. She said there were 2. The weight of the email settled in my chest like stone. 2. All this time, we thought Harrison was the scandal Victoria buried. But what if he was just the beginning? What if the real secret, the one she would have killed to keep buried, was still out there? I called Alyssa immediately. She answered on the second ring. Tell me you're still at your desk. Always. What's wrong? We were wrong. Harrison isn't the whole story. What are you talking about? I forwarded the email. Silence. Then, Jesus Christ. I need everything you can find on Julian's movements in Switzerland before 2020. Hospital records, adoption files, shelters, anything. On it. And Alyssa? Yeah? Double the security. And don't trust anyone from the Langford side. Not even the quiet ones. Because this wasn't about scandal anymore. This was about safety. And Victoria? She had been quiet. Far too quiet. She hadn't responded to the board vote. Hadn't reached out to Ethan. Hadn't denied or confirmed anything. And now I knew why. She wasn't licking her wounds. She was hiding something worse. Something still alive. A Zurich in the fall looked like a postcard. Clean streets, cold air, and the scent of roasted chestnuts drifting from carts along Bahnhofstrasse. But I wasn't here for the views. I wasn't a duchess on holiday. I was a woman with a dossier in her coat pocket, and a trail that had gone cold years ago. Until now. Alyssa had pulled miracles in 3 days. Julian Langford's passport records, rental agreements, cash-only clinic invoices from a private maternity facility outside Zurich, all filed under a pseudonym, Michael Voss. And then there was her, the woman in the photo, Marta Keller, nurse, Swiss national, former employee at St. Emilian's, an elite, off-the-books birthing clinic known for discretion and closed records. She disappeared in late 2019. No resignation, no forwarding address. But 2 months earlier, she'd given birth to twins, a boy and a girl, both surnames listed as Voss. The boy, Harrison, we knew. The girl, no birth certificate, no record in any public registry, no evidence she even lived past infancy. But someone, somewhere, had taken a photo. And that meant someone had been watching. I met with the only person willing to speak, a retired orderly named Lenz. He agreed to meet me in a quiet cafe across the river. Only after Alyssa wired a modest retainer and promised anonymity. He arrived late, nervous. His hands shook as he stirred sugar into his espresso. Why now? He asked, eyes darting to the door. Why dig this up? Because one child was hidden, I said. And I think the second was erased. His mouth tightened. You don't erase children in Zurich, he muttered. You disappear them. With money, influence. You're talking about ghosts, Duchess. I'm talking about Victoria Langford. That stopped him. His eyebrows rose. He exhaled through his nose like he'd finally connected a piece of the puzzle backward. She came once, he said quietly, to the clinic, not as a patient, as a negotiator. No medical file, no name on the ledger. But I remember her voice, like ice in a glass. She met with the administrator privately. After that, Marta left. Gone in 3 days. Julian, too. What about the baby girl? That's the thing, he said. There was a baby who stayed, in a separate ward. No records, no ID bracelet. Staff were told she was a medical trial infant, neurological issues. But she wasn't sick. I saw her smile once. She was fine. And then, one night she was gone. He swallowed hard. No discharge. No ambulance. Just gone. I walked out of the cafe with my heart pounding against my ribs like a siren. Victoria had visited Zurich. She'd stood inside a clinic where her son's children were born. And when she left, one of them vanished. No adoption record. No foster transfer. No death certificate. Just the quiet vacuum created by power and paperwork. And yet, someone had taken a picture. That photo had traveled from Zurich to a faceless inbox in Manhattan, which meant the truth wasn't buried. It was circulating. Then back in my hotel room, I printed the photo again, studied the woman's eyes. Marta. Julian had trusted her. Enough to list her as guardian. Enough to leave his children with her while he set up safe houses, accounts, plans Victoria couldn't touch. But she'd been intercepted. That's the only explanation. I opened the encrypted app Alyssa had set up for emergencies. Typed just one sentence. I need eyes on Marta Keller. Dead or alive. No assumptions. Then I opened the second app. The secure messaging line to Edward. He had contacts in European intelligence. Discretion, yes, but also access. Message. Do you have anyone in Bern who can trace missing children's records from 2019? I think Victoria erased more than a trust fund. He replied in 4 minutes. Already on it. Sending someone to your hotel. Stay inside tonight. Doors locked. Don't be alone. My stomach turned, because if he was worried, it meant we weren't in rumor territory anymore. We were in danger. Then that night, as the rain started to fall in soft sheets against the windows, a courier arrived. Brown envelope, no sender name, just my title, handwritten in calligraphy, the Duchess of Ausfeld. Inside, one photograph, and a typed note. Zurich was just the first. Look in Salzburg. Look at the winter house. They were moved, but not forgotten. She still watches them, even now. Beneath it, a set of GPS coordinates. My hands trembled, because I recognized the name Winter House. It was one of the Langford ancestral estates, abandoned after a fire in the 90s, supposedly sold, but never listed publicly. It had no address, but now I had coordinates. I called Alyssa. I'm going to Austria. Alone? No. Edward's sending someone. Mary, she said, voice sharp. This isn't about secrets anymore. It's about lives. Exactly. Because somewhere in the dark, there was another child. Maybe alive, maybe watching. And Victoria? She was no longer just the matriarch of a broken dynasty. She was a hunter. Her winter house was hidden in the folds of the Austrian Alps, half swallowed by pine forest, cloaked in fog like it was trying to forget itself. It took 3 hours by car from Salzburg. The road turned from paved to gravel, then to something barely passable, coils of moss-covered rock that hadn't seen a vehicle in years. The GPS coordinates led to a rusted iron gate. No signage, no intercom. But the emblem carved into the stone pillars was unmistakable. Langford, lion, compass, Latin, but cracked, as if the stone itself had tried to break the legacy apart. Edward's security liaison, a sharp-eyed woman named Ilse, stepped out first. She scanned the area silently, hand resting near her coat's inner pocket. I wasn't naive. We were deep in no man's land, with no surveillance and no law within miles. But this place wasn't just about danger. It was about what people did when they believed no one would ever find out. Inside, the house was still. Not abandoned, preserved. Furniture covered in sheets, chandeliers wrapped in gauze. The scent of cedar and old firewood clung to the air. A fireplace bore the charred remains of a letter never fully burned. I picked it up with gloved fingers, half legible. She won't let them have names. I folded it gently. Every room felt like a snapshot, frozen at the moment just before flight. Drawers half open, a glass of water left half full, children's books stacked on a side table, a coat that didn't belong to Victoria, a child's scarf, and then, on the second floor, I found it. A locked door, not antique like the others. New, steel reinforced. Ilse examined the frame. This wasn't here in the original plans, she said. This was added recently, within the last 5 years. Can you open it? She didn't answer. Just pulled a slim device from her bag and began working. I stood back, heart hammering, because I already knew what was behind that door. Or who. The lock clicked. The door opened with a groan, and the air that came out was warm, lived in, not dust and silence, but heat. Inside, a suite, small, clean, minimal, a single bed, a wardrobe, a shelf of children's books in German and English, and sitting at a desk, facing the window, a girl, no more than 5, dark hair, pale skin, a red ribbon tied in her hair. She turned when the door opened, and looked at me with eyes I'd only seen once before, Julian's. She didn't speak, didn't look scared, just curious. I stepped forward slowly, kneeling. Hello, I said softly. My name is Mary. She tilted her head, then said with perfect clarity, I'm not supposed to talk to anyone. Who told you that? She glanced toward a corner of the room. A camera. Offline now, but once operational. The lady. What's your name? I asked. She hesitated, then whispered it. Isabel. My heart stopped. Isabel Langford. The name erased from every record. The child Victoria swore into silence, hidden not in death, but in containment. How long have you been here, Isabel? A long time, she said. Sometimes people come to clean. Sometimes they bring books. Sometimes they say I'm sick and need to stay here until I'm better. Are you sick? She shook her head, a little smile forming. No, but they don't want anyone to know I'm not. I swallowed the scream building in my throat. This wasn't exile. This was imprisonment. And it had been maintained by silence, by money, by a family willing to erase its own to maintain control. Victoria hadn't just hidden a child. She'd imprisoned her and watched. Isabel stood, small and composed, like she'd been waiting. "Are you the one who writes stories?" she asked. "Sometimes." "Then can I go with you?" It broke me. "Yes," I said, my voice shaking. "You're coming home." Ilsa swept the suite for surveillance equipment, found 2 listening devices and 1 inactive camera rig. Everything would be sent to Edward's team. But we didn't wait. We left with Isabel wrapped in Ilsa's coat, holding my hand like she'd always known who I was. As we pulled away, I looked back one last time at Winter House. The estate stood hollow against the mountains, no longer a sanctuary, but a crime scene. And back in Salzburg, I contacted Alyssa. We found her. She's alive. Her gasp echoed through the phone. And she knows. Not everything, but enough. She's not afraid. She's ready. And Victoria? She's still watching, but she doesn't know we found her yet. What now? I looked at Isabel, sleeping in the hotel bed with a book clutched to her chest. Now we tell the world. But the hotel suite in Salzburg felt more like a command center than a refuge. The city lights gleamed through the drapes, flat against the night. Edward sat with Alyssa across from me at the table, laptops open, phones silent. Isabel lay asleep in a crib beside the bed, her chest rising and falling with a peace she had never before known. There was no turning back now. Alyssa began assembling the statement. "We confirm that Isabel Langford has been found safely, following a privately secured investigation. She is now under protective care, and evidence is being transferred to competent authorities. We ask for grace and empathy as she begins to heal." Edward nodded. "Clear, firm, truthful. We'll issue it in German, English, and whatever local languages matter. No loopholes." I watched them, 2 people who had pledged unity. But in that moment, I felt more alone than ever, because the next move would be mine. I rose, walked toward the crib, gently touched Isabel's hair. She stirred, then slept on. My heart clenched. "This is for you," I whispered. Turning back, I met Edward's gaze. "I'll release it at 10 a.m. London time. Give the press room to respond. Then we issue the evidence packet to major news outlets and human rights NGOs. We should file with Interpol and Swiss authorities simultaneously." He stood. "You're unstoppable." I allowed a half smile, but it fractured immediately, because I remembered just how many forces we were up against. Victoria had power, money, connections, institutional inertia, complicity. She had crafted a web so elegant it seemed invisible. Until now. At 10 a.m. London time, I pressed send. The statement went out. The evidence packet went live. Within minutes, headlines erupted. Social media lit up. TV networks scrambled for statements. The Langford name surged into global attention, not as philanthropy, but as a dynasty built on erasure. Victoria called 6 times in the first hour. None were answered. Her board issued a press release denying any knowledge of Isabel's existence, but the document said otherwise. Affidavits from Zurich doctors, medical logs, internal memos, contracts, all authenticated, all time-stamped. The world watched. Maishia, and by afternoon, the Langford estate was under siege. Media tents on the front lawn, paparazzi drones, protesters with placards. Justice for Isabel Langford. Covering secrets doesn't hide them. Dynasty with deadly silence. Victoria appeared on her balcony. Pearls, gray hair, the same icy composure always expected of her, and delivered a statement. "All allegations are under review. I deeply regret any pain caused. Langford Holdings is cooperating fully. I ask for privacy for my family during this difficult time." She spoke never of myself, of Ethan, of Isabel, only of allegations, pain, cooperation. These were words chosen for distance. I watched her. Her posture was perfect, but her eyes were pinched. She had lost control of the narrative she built her life on. Later, in a closed video call with the board, I addressed them directly. "You can deny, you can litigate, you can threaten, but documents cannot lie. She is alive. She is your heir. She is entitled to her name, her dignity, her family." Some members looked away, some whitened, some sat rigid as stone. Leonard Blake stared at me. He cleared his throat. "The board will commission an internal investigation. But under these circumstances, Miss Mary, Your Grace, we may have to reconsider the structure of the Langford Family Trust. The name Langford means responsibility. It demands accountability." I nodded. "Then let us begin accountability now." And that evening, exhausted, I lay beside Isabel as she slept. I traced the curve of her cheek with one finger. She stirred and whispered, half awake. "Mama?" My chest caught. I breathed. Yes, darling. Mama's right here. She curled closer. I dreamed of windows. What happened in the dream? They opened, but no one came through. I waited. She sighed. Now they can see me. I held her, and I doubted nothing. In the early hours, my phone buzzed softly. A message from an unsaved number. You released her. Good. But remember, the world sees stars and crowns. They don't see mothers willing to break chains. Be ready. No name, no signature. But I knew. Victoria wasn't the only one watching now. The chessboard had expanded, and I had just moved my queen into the open. A morning arrived like a verdict. The world felt muted beneath a cloud-heavy sky, as though nature itself anticipated the storm we'd unleashed. I awoke to a volley of messages, from media, from human rights groups, from Dominic Blake, the Langford Board's legal counsel, demanding a meeting, threatening restraining orders, alleging defamation. But at my side lay Isabel, asleep with her tiny fist curled around the blanket, and she was my anchor. Edward was already pacing outside the suite, phone pressed to his ear. I watched his silhouette through the drapes, regal, restless, protective. When he saw me, he nodded, turned, and clipped the call. The horizon beyond the Alps looked unforgiving. Perfect. They want me in Geneva by noon. I'll go with you, he said. We'll go together, and we'll bring the truth. We arrived at the International Human Rights Tribunal in Geneva early, flanked by our team and guarded quietly by diplomatic security. The marble lobby, its cold, polished surfaces echoing emptiness, seemed the ideal setting for public judgment. I signed in, presented my credentials, and for the first time, felt that this stage was built for this moment. Inside the hearing room, press filled the gallery, cameras lined the walls, and in the front row sat Victoria, stoic, flanked by Leonards, Dominic, and 2 counsel. Her eyes were sharp, her gloves were white. She appeared composed. She needed to appear composed. The tribunal's chairman introduced the case, a petition filed under statutes for enforced disappearances, child rights, corruption, and human dignity. The petition alleged that Isabel Langford was knowingly withheld, held in isolation, denied identity, and victimized by the Langford dynasty. The defense had the floor first. Dominic Blake rose, voice formal. He pled procedural errors, questioned the authenticity of documents, argued chain of custody and jurisdiction. He meticulously attacked the affidavits from Zurich, the Swiss medical logs, the letter from Marta Keller, even the memory of the orderly Lentz. He asked if my team had tampered with evidence. He challenged every ink mark, footnote, and signature. I watched Victoria's face, controlled, as though every argument landing against her was just another pin she'd absorbed in her couture over the years. Then my moment came. I stood. The room quieted. I walked to the stand, feeling the weight of every eye. Your Honors, I began, voice firm but measured. I stand not as a woman scorned, but as a bearer of truth. This case is not about scandal. It is about acknowledgement, identity, dignity. That child, I nodded gently toward Isabel, did not vanish by fate. She was made invisible by design. I told them everything. The ban, the invitation back, the investigation, Julian's secret, the folder I found, the attic letter, the locked room in Winter House. I described Isabel's voice when she emerged from the steel door. Her first words, "I'm not supposed to talk to anyone." I read the words of the note scanned. Zurich. She said there were 2. I asked them, which was worse, keeping a child alive in solitary silence, or refusing her name forever? Tears weren't a strategy. I didn't cry. Instead, I spoke with reconstruction, the steadiness of someone facing down generational power with fact and compassion. When I sat, the gallery was silent as a paused breath. Victoria responded. She rose, her gloves removed by an assistant. She gestured to her counsel, and then addressed the court in a crisp voice. I have always placed family first. The Langford name carries weight, responsibility, legacy. I never sought erasure. Any decision I made was for protection, of reputation, of children, of lineage. Allegations, no matter how dramatic, do not equate to guilt. My commitment is to clarity, not spectacle. I deeply regret any pain felt by Mary or Isabella. If records are flawed, I will cooperate. But to assume malice is to defame a lifetime of service. Her words, elegant as they were, felt hollow beside the weight I'd just presented. She asked the tribunal to grant time to verify, to audit, to filter, a temperate request, but a delay would be victory in her playbook. The tribunal adjourned. They would deliver a ruling in days, perhaps weeks, but the outcome no longer mattered as much as the shift. Isabel had a name. The world had heard. Langford's fortress had cracked. Back in Salzburg, as the phone alerts quieted, I sat in the hotel room with Isabel. She traced letters on the glass pane. I realized how heavy her silence must have weighed. I said softly, "You have a name now? You belong." She nodded. "Mama?" "Yes, darling. You belong." I watched her drift toward sleep. The war wasn't over. The public would demand more spectacle, while Victoria would claw for salvage. Lawyers, damages, narratives. But the seed of truth had sprouted, and this time, I was guarding it. The morning light in Geneva felt different, sharper, quieter, expectant. In the tribunal chamber, the air was taut with possibility. The rows of delegates, press, and human rights observers sat in hushed tension. Mary stood beside Edward and Isabel, whose small hand rested against Mary's, fingers laced with trust. The chairman cleared his throat. The verdict was ready. He spoke each count methodically. On the charge of unlawful deprivation of identity, the tribunal found that the evidence presented clearly demonstrated that Isabel Langford had been knowingly withheld from official registries, deprived of legal identity, and held under clandestine conditions. On enforced or wrongful detention, they found that the conditions under which she lived in Winter House, mechanical locks, limited communication, lack of agency, met the threshold of wrongful confinement. On obstruction of oversight and falsified documents, the tribunal ruled that the Langford Trust and associated entities had engaged in illicit transfers, concealment, and suppression of records. On child rights violations and reparations, the panel ordered the immediate restoration of her identity, inclusion in the Langford line, pending civil filings, and financial compensation for lost years and emotional injury. When they finished, there was a brief pause, a silence thick enough to echo. Then a single hand clapped, then another. The verdict was unanimous. Mary felt relief and weight simultaneous. Relief for justice, weight for what would come next. Victoria rose. Her face was pale but composed. She bowed her head and spoke. "I accept the tribunal's decision. I will comply fully with all rulings. I offer my deepest apologies to Mary and Isabel. May this be a beginning." She did not look at Mary when she said, "beginning," but the whisper hung heavy in the room. Outside the courthouse, the world roared. Flashbulbs, reporters, activists chanting, "Isabel has a name," banners waving in multiple languages. Mary emerged with Isabel in her arms, Edward by her side. She stopped on the steps, heart pounding. She drew a breath and spoke into every microphone. "Today is not just about vindication. It's about reclaiming dignity. Isabel deserves her life, unhidden, unapologetic, unedited. To everyone watching, know this. Power built on silence cannot sustain itself. Speak, record, resist, and above all, never let your name be stolen." She kissed Isabel's forehead, and the world turned. Tekinatan. In the months after, changes rippled. Victoria resigned from the Langford Foundation Board. Legal actions ensued. Many of her assets were placed under freeze orders pending audit. New trustees were installed. Programs were renamed. Public transparency became policy, never rhetoric. The Langford name shifted from empire to example, of reckoning, and the cost of secrets. Isabel enrolled in school, under her true name. She learned to write Langford in her own hand, to see her full self in the mirror. Mary and Edward found a home closer to the mountains, with room for laughter, bookshelves, and windows that opened wide to sun instead of shadows. Mary's consulting practice shifted. She specialized now in helping people uncover hidden legacies, of families, of corporations, of lives buried under silence. She wrote an op-ed in a major journal titled "The Quiet Crime of Erasure," which became required reading in law schools. Late one evening, she found a photograph on her desk. It had no sender, just a single line. "The other one remembers too." Her breath caught. She carried the photo to Isabel's room. The girl sat reading a fairy tale. Mary knelt beside her and whispered, "There's more to discover, my love, but you are seen. You are real. You are your name." Isabel looked up. eyes steady. I know. Mary placed the photo in a drawer. She didn't open it, because some secrets will wait, but she would never let them govern again.